Misha here, and thought I would just talk a little bit about the background and history of FN's P90, or Project 1990, which is usually classified as a PDW, personal defense weapon, but also could be considered a submachine gun. It was originally conceived in 1986 to fire a new experimental cartridge that was meant to have better range, accuracy, and penetration than 9mm NATO, 9x19. And in 1989, NATO itself kind of outlined some specifications for a new personal defense weapon. Basically, it needed to be unobtrusive. It needed to be able to be just slung on the body and not get in the way, even if not with a hand on it, because it wasn't a primary weapon for the most part. It was just there as a personal defense weapon. There were other things like weight, size, all that good stuff, capacity, and then the cartridge penetration. FN came out with the P90 first in 1990, and an early version of the ammo, SS90, 5.7 by 28. The ammo itself was kind of a dual projectile type where you had a core with an outer sleeve, and it was basically designed to penetrate body armor, which was becoming increasingly a problem. It really had been a rising problem since the 70s, and by the 80s, newer body armor was getting pretty advanced. What FN came out with was really a radical gun. They went with a bullpup design, which is pretty interesting for a submachine gun. This allowed them to make it very compact, while still giving a reasonably long barrel, also having a reasonable ammunition capacity. They made it ambidextrous and very modular. They used polymers quite generously to keep the weight down. And what they came up with, the P90, is just under 20 inches long, tip to tip. And since it's not a folding stock gun, you don't have to worry about deploying a stock to get it ready. You just put it to your shoulder and go. It can very easily be fired single-handed with either hand because it is completely ambidextrous. Either the controls are mirrored on each side, or in the case of the ejection port, it just ejects downward. It uses a 50-round magazine, very interesting design, and it lays flat on top of the gun. The only downside, it's a little slow to change, but with 50 rounds, the idea was you really wouldn't need to change it, because, again, defense gun. If you can't take care of it in 50 rounds, well, you understand. It was given about a 10.5-inch barrel with a flash hider, so very respectable. The barrel itself was cold hammer forged, chrome lined. Typical FN quality there. Often it's said that the gun is a direct or a straight blowback. This is mostly true, but because 5.7 does have some power behind it, the barrel actually does reciprocate about 1/10 of an inch before the bolt leaves it, so it is a little bit of a delayed system. Just a little bit, just enough. And this helps keep the cyclic rate down to about 900 rounds per minute, and it does fire from the closed bolt. You get the drift. The earliest guns were kind of tested in 1991. A few revisions were made, and then it was reintroduced in 1992 with a new type of ammo, SS-109. And from there, sky's the limit. I think I said 109, I apologize. SS-190. In the 90s, it kind of was a slow burn, with more and more special forces and police getting interested. And then in the late 90s, it received competition from the HK MP7, which fired its own small diameter high velocity cartridge, 4.6 by 30. And in 1999, running through the early 21st century, the two guns and calibers would go head to head. NATO tried to standardize on one, having trials. The committee decided that FN's 5.7 was superior. However, HK, Germany, and some others objected. So no consensus was reached, and so neither was declared the standard, although the P90 has seen wider spread use. But the MP7 has also been used. At least 40, probably more, nations have used it in some capacity. Now, this isn't a gun that people are going to buy a lot of. They're going to get a few hundred, couple of thousand for special forces. Now, it's worth also saying the police departments also like it. And it has seen continuous military use. Early guns would have a hollow sight with a polymer housing and a white reticle with fiber optics. Later, this would be mostly completely phased out in favor of an alloy sight housing with a black reticle and tritium inserts. And then, of course, railed versions have been introduced over time as well. The housing is modular, so you can switch between them. You're not committed. The standard military version is black. And, of course, it's select fire, semi or full auto. It's a very light gun. It's under 6 pounds unloaded, just over 6 pounds loaded. And does its job very well. Very high quality, very well made. As for the PS90, the civilian version, it was first announced in 2005 and started to appear on store shelves in America in 2006. Of course, it's semi-auto only. It also is longer to comply with the NFA to be a Title I. The barrel had to be extended out to about 17.5 inches. Why over 16? Because even at 16 inches, the overall length was not quite past 26. So to be safe, they extended the barrel out enough to get an overall length of about 26.25, give or take. Other than that extended barrel, it's the same, and of course the semi-auto. Early versions would have the hollow sight, the see-through, the sight on it. Later, they would offer rail versions. Early on, the idea was green was the standard, with black being the special. To that end, the black PS90s, at least 2006, 2007, came with the 50-round mags, whereas the green ones, the standard ones, came with the 30. Now, the 30s were the same body, they just had a longer follower in them to prevent more rounds from going in. They also make a 10-round version, which has a ridiculously long follower. But yeah, those started to hit stores then. Over time, the black ones have become easier to find, almost to the point where you see black now more than the green. But yeah, it has the same quality, and it can use many of the same parts. Mags, sights. Some of the internals have been changed, of course, to restrict it to semi-auto. But you can put in a standard P90 type barrel if you file, of course, for your SBR paperwork. But yeah, that's a very brief rundown of the history. A very interesting gun. Has some pros and cons that I'm sure Jay will talk about. But with good ammo and everything, it is very reliable. But I'll let him take it from there. Get to the point.
So I'll very briefly go over the kind of the shootability of the PS90. To talk about the practicality of it, I almost think you have to do a review of the round itself. And frankly, I'm not a ballistics expert. I have no expertise in the field with this firearm, so I really can't speak to that very much. So I'll let you guys argue that out in the comments. But for me, I have this purely just to have it. I don't feel the need to justify my purchases to anyone, to assign them a specific reason. So I think it's fun to shoot. I think it's a cool looking design. Definitely looks like nothing else. So that's why I have it. Recoil is very light. Follow-up shots are very good, but limited somewhat by the plasticky trigger. Now it's a little bit of creep, but it's a pretty soft break. Not bad, but not as good as, it's pretty typical bullpup. Not as good as a lot of triggers you might handle. Everything is ambidextrous, so that means everything is going to be mirrored on both sides control-wise. Mag changes are very slow. Pop this out, lift it up, slide it back in, slap it down. I've made a few changes to this. I've added this design machine low profile mount. This originally had the tall pick rail with the iron sights inside. So I've replaced that to make that a little bit lower, that red dot, micro dot. This is the Vortex Venom. And then I've added this barrel shroud by MFI just to cover up that extra long barrel. I do think the practicality personally is limited a little bit by the long barrel, because the whole point of this design was to be very short, and in order to meet compliance they've had to add a longer than 16-inch barrel to make it compliant to meet overall length requirements. But like I said, for me, this is a gun that has been in a lot of stuff and obviously is a head turner, and I just like the look of, and I like shooting, so that to me is enough to warrant having one in the collection. So now I will throw it over to Misha for his thoughts.
Hi, Misha again. And I just wanted to give a couple of personal stories, notes about me and the P90 and PS90. Setting Stargate aside, really my first exposure to the P90 was 2003, 2004, in that time frame. A local place, a local Class 3 dealer who was actually at the time a pretty major FN distributor and even a military contractor. We were at their store, and they were kind of giving us a tour through, and they pulled out a P90, which, at that time was still very new. Of course, we talked about it, the specs and everything, and I thought it was really interesting. I mean, for that era, think about it, even today the P90 looks pretty modern, but think 15 years ago, there was nothing like it at the time. And we're still during the assault weapons ban right then, although it was getting ready to come off, and people were being hopeful that it wouldn't get renewed and be allowed to sunset. So with that kind of in the back of my mind, I asked them about a semi-automatic version, and they said, well, no, there's not one, but one is coming out called the PS90. So I was eagerly awaiting that. A little bit more came out about it over the next year, and then in 2006, one of my local haunts, the gun shops that I went to on a regular basis, it was Armory, called me, and they got one in, and so I got first pick at it and picked it up. And so that would have been a Gen 1 or at most a Gen 2, and it had the plastic polymer sight housing, and it had the white reticle, so the early style sight. It was also green at that time. The greens were significantly cheaper than the blacks. The only difference was the blacks came with a 50 round mag, the greens had a 30, and you could get mags, so it wasn't a big deal. So I just got the green, saved a little money. I had that. Of course, it was 100% reliable, a lot of fun, a lot of cool points, a lot of bragging rights for that day and time, and very reliable. But of course, ammo was hard to get, and if you think it's kind of pricey today, imagine back then when it came out. It was up there. So at some point, I traded or sold it off. I sincerely don't remember when or why or where, but I did. Not because I hated the gun, but just because at that time I was going through very, money was tight, and that was just an expensive gun that fired expensive ammo, and there you go. The second one I picked up was I'm trying to think which one it was. I know it came from CDNN. I've had two others. One was the so-called standard model that had the metal, the alloy sight housing with the black reticle and the tritium, and the other was the rail model. And I honestly can't remember which one came first. I remember the rail model I sold because it just didn't do it for me. And I think I ended up selling the standard model because it was a really good price. For a time there, a few years back, PS90 prices really went down. We're talking $1,000. So I bought it when they were cheap, and then they went back up. Probably someone offered me good money for it, and so I sold it off. And I know Jay did the same thing back then, but he just picked another one up from an acquaintance. So that's how it happened. They are fun guns. They are good guns. They're just one of those guns, when I don't have one, I want one, and when I have one, I'm just like, why do I have this? And it's kind of a shame. I think if SBRs were easier or not a thing, it would be a slam dunk. As a carbine, it's still not bad. It's still very light and handy, but that extra barrel, it's just it ruins what would otherwise be such a compact gun. So, just, be aware of that. But yeah, that's my personal experience and stories with those. The factory mags have been great. The ATI mags, the Korean ones, they start off good, but the springs do not hold up over time. At least that's my experience. The factory FN ammo is good. American Eagle is at best hit or miss. So, there you have it. I'll give it back to Jay.
Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this sort of tag team, That's Gross, look at the PS90. And if you have any questions or have your own stories about the PS90 or even the P90, please post them in the comments below. And please be sure to click like if you like this video. And be sure to subscribe to check out some of our other videos. And we will see you again next time.